We are now looking for comments, constructive ideas to how to build this coherence in the SWA framework. So you've had a lot of input on the thematic ideas, you've had a summary of them, and you've also heard the overall framework that we looked at. So we really want to try and bring this together. So we really look forward to your short, incisive, constructive contributions. Barry.
Very short. Every paper and every presentation I've seen starts global, then regional, then national. Please turn it around, national, then regional, then global, because monitoring always looks like an extractive process, where those at the global level are trying to squeeze information out of people, when in fact it really should be the other way around. And that goes for anything else. Whenever you're doing it on SWA, make sure you're thinking national first, and how that influences and helps everybody else.
Hi, John Oldfield with WASH Advocates. Just a quick follow-up question to the monitoring discussion. I was hoping to get out of the monitoring recap there discussion about monitoring on a global level and more of a discussion about how SWA can help monitor the 400 plus commitments. That's what I was hoping for, but rereading the documents here preparing for this question, I realized that I'm misinformed. I wonder if any thought was given in the monitoring session to how it's not a national thing, it's a country by country, it's a commitment by commitment, it's a very specialized granular form of monitoring, and I do see a role for the SWA Secretariat in at least following up and catalyzing that. Thanks.
I very much like your point, Barry, and I think that this does speak to the where SWA is coming from, which is building from the bottom, and that's what we want to continue. That's why we're a membership organization. Okay, other comments from the floor, please. Thoughts, where you at in this discussion, please, Ananda?
My answer may not be there today, but anyway, we also didn't have any fun, but anyway, I would like to ask from the Cockery Group, NPRI, that espresso cup, who were responsible? Was it the governments? Were the government responsible for the failure of reaching the targets of tracking? Were there any external agencies present in these countries?
I think this is situations where countries find themselves, as in the case of Liberia, coming out of a civil war and having to put together and sort of being very passionate about trying to put together an infrastructure. So there were lots of agencies, lots of NGO and emergency situations. I mean, Afghanistan is in this situation, security, NGOs, emergency situations, trying to build out of that a coherence so that Liberia could meet the water and sanitation services of its citizens at some scale. And the idea that NPRI helped to catalyze that. So there was a demand from the government of Liberia. Indeed, the president of Liberia got engaged in this dialogue, and I think it had quite a constructive outcome. So the demand comes from the countries, and then the support comes from this partnership.
I just want to have a comment on the monitoring side, and I also agree with the idea of have an integrated global, regional, and country monitoring system in the long term. But now, based on Indonesia had facilitating 11. Last year we have facilitated 11 countries in East Asia, and we found that now we have some problem that we still have a gap between the national data and the global data which in the water and sanitation now. So to just an idea how if SWA can take a role in this, I mean not maybe in short term or maybe in medium term to minimize the gap, to build the dialogue between the country and also the global to minimizing the gap on this data. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think that's certainly been a large part of the agenda in the discussion, and I know that WHO, who's responsible for certainly the glass side of it, and I know that UNICEF and WHO have, on the JMP side of it, have been working to try and hold workshops and discussions to try and align this better. But if there's specific things, if there's any value add for other partners to do that, I really like the recommendation that both donors and indeed other partners should concentrate a lot more on the data question. Because I do think that within SWA we've got the political commitments, we've got the action on the ground, but actually the key thing is monitoring and the data, so we can make sure that the sector is better understood. Please.
My name is Nash, WaterAid. The group that presented on country processes, I saw a statement that seemed a bit contentious. It says that NPR support will be extended to countries that are off track, that is okay, but also that do not have a sector program. You know, it could mean a lot. You know, if a country has a policy on water and sanitation, if the ministries are somewhat coordinated, you know, would NPRI still be extended to them or not? You know, so that do not have a sector program, you know, needs to be unpacked a bit further, because it could be a source of contention.
But there's the issue that I don't think everyone is on the same page. And so I can, we have GLASS. And generally, hopefully, do we agree that GLASS is there to monitor sector progress? Is that a contentious statement? Is that what we want it to do? Let me not ask if it does it. Let me ask, is that what we want it to do? Okay. So there's been discussion of, GLASS needs to, GLASS and SWA are intrinsically linked. Should GLASS be monitoring the HLM commitments? On the flip side of that, regularly, I'm hearing from many, many people, the richness of the commitments and the importance of the commitments is that it allows us to go back to the minister and say, did you do this? So if GLASS, by nature as a global report, is going to use broad indicators and aggregate information up and compare across, then you're going to lose the specificity of the commitment. So that leads us to the question of who monitors that. Okay, so in Angola, the minister made a commitment to start the implementation of 2 major sanitation programs, namely the expansion of CLTS, SLTS, to an additional 6 provinces, and a project for CLTS consolidation funded by the European Union. So referencing very specific projects and programs in specific places. How can that be monitored? So this is the level of specificity. There are other broader things, like in Ghana, provide microfinance for household latrine construction. That's a bit broader, but would you want to set it as an indicator of progress on HLM commitments? No, because it's not a commitment that many countries made. In fact, most probably didn't. A few maybe did. So how do we capture, if we're hearing on one side that the accountability lies in our ability to hold the ministers to his word for saying, we will do this, and you want to check back in a year, did we do this? Then that's not about a global report or someone sort of from the outside or doing. As such, the approach, so I'm just explaining sort of the approach we've taken and why we've taken it. We have 400 very specific commitments, some broad, some less broad, but none of them are, there's been no discussion in SWA that everyone needs to be doing the same thing and that there's anything broadly that we can monitor across countries. So the monitoring has to come from the country level. We have worked on the presumption that it's the government's job to monitor that and to report it to us. It's our job at the Secretariat to, number one, coordinate that process, so providing guidelines and requesting the information at certain points, which we've also been explained and told is an important trigger for even our government colleagues, that then it allows them to go back to the minister and say, the globe or the partners in country are watching. So with that, so this is the presumption of what we are doing. We are aligning efforts with GLASS. GLASS is also in a period of discussion of how they do things better. And so I can't be specific on how we'll align, but we know that we want to be working towards the same thing. And if there's going to be a process where GLASS is sending information or requesting information, then we'll work to align with that. And we'll work to start aligning our timelines and our processes. Hopefully, any reporting that's coming up is coming from a validation process, that it's not one person reporting and saying, this is how we're doing. So that's a particular criticism of the first time that we did the monitoring of the 2010 commitments. So we know that we need a more robust process. We know that we need to not be duplicative with GLASS, but we need to be aligned because it's not the same thing. And we know, and again, here's maybe the contentious point, but I would, as the Secretariat has taken the position that it's the governments themselves that need to do the monitoring and reporting, which is facilitated by us. Is that a fair presumption? Is that something that we're in agreement on? Okay. I'm going to go on with that presumption. You can challenge it later on. So if the reporting needs to come from the government, we need to, from the Secretariat, coordinate a process that is well publicized and requests a multi-stakeholder consultation and requests ministerial sign-off. And with that, we can then say we have a valid set of data that reports on the status of implementation of the commitment. From there, we can then compile that, analyze that, and disseminate that. That's generally the process that will start, and this is what I mentioned yesterday, we'll start that in January, so it'll be started earlier and people will have more time. So if you did just put down the commitments in April and not think about them again, now we're saying it's coming. We're going to ask about them and hopefully you'll pick them back up and start talking about them not only within the government but within the partners, because it's maybe the government's going to do those actions on their own, maybe they need support, and that's part of the ongoing dialogue to strengthen the sector framework. So that's on the short term, that's where we stand, because that's what we have in front of us, and that's what we can do to monitor what we have in front of us. In the long term, we're talking about strengthening monitoring, strengthening country processes. In the long term, it's you all who are involved in all of these processes, and the commitments, again, should be coming out, or hopefully would be coming out of that ongoing dialogue. They're not coming out of the preparatory process for the HLM that starts 6 months in advance and is maybe potentially not in coordination at all with your ongoing sector dialogue. So if your sector dialogue in Uganda, your joint sector review is telling you this are not working right, this is working great, so we're not going to make a commitment on that, but this is what we need to do to fix this problem we have, that's going to go into your commitments. And that's already in your monitoring system. So in the future, in the long term, that monitoring is embedded in your country processes and will not be a separate process.
Okay, thanks, Cindy, for that very detailed explanation. So where we're at is that SWA will be helping you monitor and coordinate these 400 commitments, and it's very high on our agenda, though we will seek not to duplicate with the other global processes.
Thank you. I just want to talk about monitoring and the experience that we've seen globally, that developing countries are now complaining that the capacity to monitor, because there are so many things to report, and that even the conventions are asking for reporting. You have the desertification, climate, so there's too much reporting. Now what we are trying to work with, especially I think glass is the foundation. We cannot reinvent anything new. Glass is the foundation that we are trying at the global level to align with. Like in Africa, we have an M&E process for the entire Africa and to report to the heads of states. But I'm just from Addis Ababa, and we had a meeting, the glass, WHO, they were all there, and there's a global steering committee. What we need to do, for example, maybe to say for the high-level commitments to include in part of that monitoring, but not to start a process because the countries do not have the capacity. Monitoring costs a lot of money. We just acquired 2 million euros from African Water Facility, that's AMCAO, just for monitoring, M&E. So if we are monitoring in Africa, what we need to do to look at all of those agreed norms, we define them so that we'll agree, rather than trying to look for reinventing the wheel because the countries do not have the capacity.
I mean, what's great to see is AMCAR getting into and putting a lot of money and support behind monitoring, and I think this is a big step forward.
Yes, I have a question to the group related to the sustainable dialogue process. I think it is extremely important that, of course, one of the core elements of this political process is a high-level meeting, so we need to prepare it well. Then we need to report on the commitment which are being made, and we just got an answer regarding this. But I have a question related to other issues, which goes beyond the high-level meetings. What's going on with this partnership between high-level meetings? Just one concrete example, concrete proposition. Between March 2013 and September 2013, we will have 6, 7, 8 months, critical months, to secure a water goal in the post-2015 processes. What will be the role of sanitation on water for all to make sure that we will have this goal? The role of sanitation on water for all as a complementary process of what UN Water is supposed to do, of what UNICEF is supposed to do. So there we do see a niche, a potential political niche to be addressed by sanitation on water for all. This is the first thing. I have a second proposition regarding to sustain the political dialogue is, where do we stand with respect to the human rights issues? There is more and more countries which are complying on advocating for it. Where do we stand on would the sanitation on water for all partnership will do something with respect to analyzing, assessing the current level of implementation of human rights. So this is two key propositions that can add to the political forces of sanitation on water for all.
Okay, good. Well, let's focus on that. I mean, two very concrete suggestions. Is there some added value that SWA partners, the partnership, or is this a matter of simply sharing the information between partners? Yeah, any thoughts on those two? I thought were very helpful suggestions. Because the post-MDG dialogue didn't come out in the presentation, but I'm sure it was implicit since we've already had a session on that. Okay, any thoughts on that? And let's talk about this, the ideas to elevate the political dialogue.
Yeah, just to the second suggestion from Johan, to think of integrating the human rights criteria to a kind of monitoring. I mean, JMP is doing that right now at the moment in their working groups. They are elaborating on a new set of post-2015 indicators, and the basic of it is to integrate at highest possible level the human rights criteria. So, I mean, following monitoring of SWA at a global level, at the outcome level, will definitely be based on human rights criteria. So just concentrate on JMP and then you can't miss anything, I think, regarding to WASH outcome monitoring and human rights criteria.
Thinking about how we do the political influencing, and I think Sanjay laid out a very clear but complex sort of conceptual sort of overview of all the processes going on. And it seems to me we have a wonderful platform here to influence many of those processes. And not just, yes, you have the WHO, UNICEF, JMP process, the post-2015 process, but you also have all these country things. And I think you laid it out, Sanjay, but maybe we need to think more critically about how we contribute to that from a country perspective, from an international perspective, and provide some coherence so the 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever of all the sort of parallel processes going on are influenced with one voice.
Chris Williams from WSCC. I just wanted to build on that previous point. I think one of the things that might not have come out clearly from Sanjay's presentation this morning is that in addition to the different processes he laid out, this is something that's going to continue beyond 2013 General Assembly meetings in September. This is going to run right up into 2015. And quite frankly, as far as most of us are concerned in this room, even beyond that, we need to even be thinking about what are the collective practices and experiences that we have in this room, especially at country level among country practitioners, that will enable governments to fulfill their commitments that they sign up to in 2015. So we should not only be interested in influencing the process, but be able to react creatively to what comes out on the other side of this. And I think there's a lot that's happening in all of our countries in which we're working in, and I'm sure if we sat down and took an inventory of the number of practices that are unfolding in each of the countries, we would find that that's a really good raw material. That's an asset that WSA can tap for the purposes of articulating collectively what we think are WASH priorities and influencing targets and even indicators.
L'implication de la notion de droits humains. Est-ce qu'on peut avoir une petite explication sur ça? Est-ce que c'est parce que je sais que Amnesty International parle de droits de l'homme, droits humains. Dans SWA, la notion de droits humains, est-ce que c'est sous le même angle? Comment ça rime?
My comment on that would be that this is a political opportunity. This is something that, over I mean, it's been endorsed by a great many countries, and something like 50–60% of countries have signed themselves up to it, and the question is how to roll this down into practice. But it is a political opportunity to take up a dialogue on water and sanitation, the right of poor people to have these services, and to actually hold the politicians that have committed themselves to this to account. So I think it's an opportunity for, in your country, to, and indeed other countries, to use this if your government has already committed itself to the human right for water and sanitation. But I don't think we've had any other suggestions how we collectively might do this, but I think just we point out that this is a good opportunity.
I think in our own countries we have, in many cases, pretty well-oiled mechanisms for advocacy and influencing lobbying. So we know when we have to reach out to the grassroots, we know how to do it. We know how to get sign-on letters together and where to send them and so on. But when it comes to the United Nations, it's a much more complex process. So I think we definitely need assistance from, I think SWA, Secretariat could certainly play a role in this. When is the time to take action, and how do we do it in very simple terms? Sign here or whatever it is, because people I think find it quite difficult to engage.
Some members, some partners here are fully engaged in the human rights dialogue and in, let's say, the post-MDG dialogue. What is lacking is a common set of information. So I think we have unequal information across this room, and if there are ways that you can use SWA's list server or whatever else would be helpful to share more information, that I know there are many agencies here whose business is sharing information, and they do that better. So I'm not suggesting that SWA Secretariat does anything more, but I think you'd be encouraged to share the dialogue as we move on.
Yeah, just a general point regarding the three themes overall. I hear lots of words like planning. I hear the word process often. I hear like country process dialogues. Now these words, there's a lot of planning fatigue, and I think these words are far too soft. And I think the themes should have terminology which tells you what you're trying to do. Not the word country process to me is an off-putting phrase. So when we get down to sort of putting things into writing, I think it's very important to say that we're actually going to sustain political commitment or something like that. We don't want a political dialogue. We want something out of the dialogue, and I think that needs to be expressed more clearly, both for the internal partners, so they know what everybody's supposed to be doing, but also the message outside that this is something as an action-oriented entity and not just a process-oriented entity. I think that's very important. And similarly with this NPRI, I'm very nervous about yet more planning, and there should be no plan without a financing strategy. It should be illegal to produce a plan that doesn't have a financing strategy attached to it. And I think too often we just go round in a circle of plan, debate, and so on and so forth.
I completely agree. I think we've really got to think about the language. I think it's a challenge to the CPTT to change their name and trying to tell us actually what it is that they're focusing on, and that would be very helpful. There was earlier, so let's move the discussion, if you like, to the second set of issues, which is the I can't use the word country process, so I'm completely flummoxed, but to the discussion about helping build capacity. That's even worse. But in any event, all those things, those wonderful things that Dominic said. Dominic, do you want to just kick off by, because there was a question on NPRI, and I think if you could just address that.
But Nash's point was good. He said, program, what does program mean? Idrissa earlier said, all countries have some plan. I mean, there's a plan somewhere, in some cupboard somewhere. The problem is the quality of the plan. And I noticed that our documentation in SWA has even gone to the dreaded F-word, framework. So it's getting diluted along the way. Now, just a point, I think this Tarek's analogy of the intensive care unit is probably the most useful. So we don't really know what it is that's wrong with the country, but they need to be in the intensive care unit. I think that's probably the most useful starting point. And should SWA and the Secretariat and the Steering Committee be meddling in countries even with an ICU?
I think the discussion has gone long enough on the NPRI. We just need to stop that, step into a number of countries and do it and see what happens. Then we can learn from those and then support the next batch of countries.
Having been participating in the NPRI or country process group, I just would like to propose to Dominic perhaps to, in your presentation you said, okay, we will discuss on all of that because there was no consensus, we will discuss on that on Friday. Perhaps you could be so kind to, however, try to summarize a little bit the points where there was no consensus about, so that the main parts of the discussion, because the others didn't have the chance to follow these discussions. And they will, as you saw, only 3 or 4 people in this room will participate in the Friday discussions. I think it would be really helpful and worthwhile to further present a little bit on the different parts, pros and cons, and the discussions. We had an we had a voting on whether or not, for example, NPRI should be stopped completely, NPRI should be strengthened, or we should strengthen further than NPRI on the country level. These were really important discussions, and I think it is a pity if the others cannot participate in that.
Let me give you the results of the voting so you know about it. You had a choice of 3 things to vote on, and the majority voted that SWA should continue working in community processes, and that they should include in this the intensive care unit, but they should also think about, I'm sort of recognizing that there's a broad demand here from some countries that are not in the intensive care unit, but maybe have one gangrene leg, that we should actually have a sort of a clinic set up that might help other parts of the anatomy get to be working better. So there was a sort of endorsement on that. There was a fair number of people who said, look, stick to your knitting, continue with NPRI, we've made progress, continue doing that. And I think there were 6 people who said, look, maybe this is not the time, and maybe we don't have the comparative advantage to work that closely at country level. So that was the sort of consensus which, well, it wasn't a consensus, but they are the 3 different opinions we had. Over to you, Dominic.
Exactly, it wasn't a consensus. It's good to bring it up, but it wasn't a consensus. And I think after doing that poll, Peter Lockery and Glenn's points about what should the Secretariat and the Steering Committee be directly involved in, and what do we as individuals and organizations get involved in, wasn't sorted out. So that when people were voting, they were saying, yeah, we want more to work more on country processes. They weren't saying the Secretariat should work more on country processes. And I think that's why we didn't get consensus, and why I framed the feedback on that being a fundamental problem. We all want to work on country processes, though we shouldn't call them that. And without financing strategies, we shouldn't even start. We all need to do that. We all will continue doing that. But what is the role of the Secretariat? What is the role of the Steering Committee and its working groups? That is the critical thing that we need to take forward to Friday.
Right, just very quickly on the National Planning for Results initiative, and following on from Nash's point, I fully agree. I think it's a matter of doing it and learning from it rather than talking about it. Despite, you know, a lot of the, I think the big problem is we're struggling to emphasize, we know there's a need, we're not quite sure what it is and what we have to do to address it. One thing is that there's huge demand from countries for it. So that's something we cannot ignore. And certainly from UNICEF's side, there's huge demand for countries, for us to work on this. The interesting thing about planning and financing is that it is a vicious cycle. Without a plan, you don't get finance. I mean, the whole Education for All worked on no credible plan should go unfunded. So there's that vicious cycle. So, you know, you need the plan to get the financing, and you need the financing to realize your plan. So I think what countries are realizing, my impression, and this is because there's a huge demand out there that we're not responding to, what countries are realizing is that if they can come up with really good analysis that underpins a kind of a prioritized plan, not a wish list, but analysis that leads to identification of bottlenecks, that leads to clear actions with clear outcomes, then they feel that they are in a better position. Let's not forget it's their own funding that we're talking about. A, to capture their own funding, and B, to capture the transfers that Alan was talking about. So, you know, we are going to go ahead with doing some work in responding to countries' demand, in doing some work. In the spirit of transparency and openness, we have shared it with the task team, however you want to call it, and the steering committee for their comment, and we have agreed to come back to them and report on them on the progress and so on. But I do agree it is something that we have to start doing and learning from rather than just talking about.
That takes us on to the last discussion, which is on monitoring, and because there were several points made about the importance of strong analytical tools at the country level, regular monitoring, regular reporting in, talk about joint sector reviews. Are there any other thoughts that you'd had about the comments and the actions setting up this SWA monitoring task team, or any other thoughts that you had about that?
I would like to go through the short-term and medium-term actions as I noted them following the presentation of this working group. And I think the first point they said that they would start with coordination. For me, it would, as I didn't participate in the group, I don't know exactly whether they were talking about coordination of global monitoring or coordination of, as Cindy explained, trying to get information of SWA, of monitoring of SWA HLM commitments, as I understand. If it's about global monitoring, I wonder whether there were also reflections about whether SWA is really the adequate platform to have a global coordination role in global monitoring, or perhaps we could also consider UN Water as being the classical organization having such a mandate, for example. I don't know whether these kind of discussions have been led in the group. I think it is important to know a little bit reflections on that. Great that you are planning to have a SWA monitoring working group. Then you said you would commission a rapid appraisal of sector analysis processes and good practices in WASH monitoring at country level. I just recommend to keep in to have inside also the monitorings of the national sectors in all the different countries. So not only to look with the rapid appraisal on, let's say, the global initiatives that are taking information at the national level, but definitely also the ones which should, in the long term, the only one be to develop this information, the national sector itself in each country. So please take this into account when you're starting to invest in a rapid appraisal. You said also that you want, in the medium term, to develop a shared set of norms and standards for monitoring. I think this should be really carefully thought about, setting standards and norms for global monitoring, and who will apply then these, and how will these will be used and elaborated. It's really important. And again, the question whether it's really the role of SWA to elaborate standard and norms. Also, we all agree that a more harmonized approach of what is monitored is necessary, but is this a role of SWA to define these norms and standards in the monitoring? So how can this then be a medium-term action for SWA?
Agencies like yourself and other agencies can discuss what these shared standards should be. The SWA is not going to be making any decisions or setting any standards. At least that's my understanding. Clarissa.
In terms of whether Sanitation Water for All, here, let me stand up, whether Sanitation Water for All is the group that should do this kind of coordination, we feel that there's a huge window of opportunity because of the nature of the membership, the partners that are in the partnership. The leads of almost all of the major monitoring initiatives are part of Sanitation Water for All. They've come in this equal partnership. And that includes, of course, quite a few agencies that are not UN agencies. So this, as a multi-stakeholder partnership, offers a sort of a level playing field in which everybody can get together and talk. So therefore, offers this huge opportunity to create something like a working group in which you bring together all the leads of these initiatives, but also with a membership from the countries who are struggling with issues of monitoring, who can then bring in their voice. The other thing I think we should make clear is that during the conversation, there was a lot of consensus around the fact that Sanitation Water for All is not a police force. You know, the idea that we would set up some sort of global monitoring set of rules and regulations and then Sanitation Water for All would somehow go around and police that is exactly what we want to get away from. It's called a shared set of norms and standards for a reason. The idea that we would reach consensus and that we would come up with a set of norms and standards that were so compelling and useful that countries would want to use them and would willingly adopt some sort of globally agreed set of parameters.
J'ai une préoccupation par rapport à la suggestion du groupe 1 sur le suivi, notamment sur la création des groupes de travail pour mener à bien toutes les initiatives. Je rappelle qu'il faut faire attention pour ne pas qu'il y ait duplication de structures, une multiplicité de structures. Dans certains pays, nous savons qu'il y a un cadre qui est déjà mis en place, notamment à travers les clusters WASH, notamment avec l'UNICEF. Donc ces genres de structures mériteraient d'être consolidées, élargies, et non nécessairement créer de nouvelles cadres pour assurer le suivi. Et également en matière d'outils pour le suivi, notamment les normes, je dirais qu'au niveau de la plupart des ministères, des départements, il y a des outils de planification et de suivi qui existent déjà, notamment les systèmes d'information sur le secteur de l'eau, qui ont été développés par ces départements. Mais malheureusement, j'avais souligné tout à l'heure que le gros problème, c'est la pérennisation du système. Et donc, je pense qu'il faut aller déjà sur l'existant, voir comment améliorer, renforcer pour améliorer la performance du suivi. Merci.
I think what is expected, if SWA is going to be relevant in countries, it will have to play the role of coordinating the donors. This is what we discussed in our group. Coordinating the donors, because that's where there is a problem. We need donors to be coordinated because the challenges that we are having is that there is political will in many countries. Issues of sanitation are now known to politicians, but what the challenges you have is the competing priorities, where sanitation goes down the lot, on the lot of priorities. It will be good for SWA Secretariat to engage development partners at country level and NGOs, so that the profile of sanitation can be raised and the priority of sanitation can be visible to politicians. Because the challenge is competing priorities. That's what we see at country level.
To my mind, a lot of this is interwoven. I'm creating a political priority is intimately linked to the monitoring business that is intimately linked to what actually happens on the ground. I think that the Sanjay's call for action, I think, is an important sort of note to end on. This is our first partnership meeting, so we can't say we spent too much time talking like this. This has been sort of one of the few times we have. but clearly we've got to move into action.